This is 10-6, using the quadratic formula. And with the quadratic formula, this is just another way to solve quadratic equations. Remember that this is the form of our quadratic equation. It's related to our quadratic function, which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And so its related quadratic equation is this ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And we set it equal to 0 because basically what we're doing is substituting 0 for y. And when you substitute a 0 for y, you're finding your x-intercept. And remember that your solutions to your quadratic function are your x-intercepts. So last time we did factoring to find our x-intercept or to solve our quadratic function. This time we're going to use the quadratic formula to solve our quadratic function and find our x value. So here's our formula. Our formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now I know that this looks really complicated, but it's really not. All these letters of A, B, C, all those relate right back to your quadratic equation. Remember that A is always the coefficient of your x squared term, B is always the coefficient of your x term, and C is always that constant, the number by itself. So if you'll remember that, all you have to do is write this formula down and plug in your numbers and solve. So let's practice it. They want us to use the quadratic formula to solve x squared plus 2 equals negative 3x. Well, the first thing I notice is that this is not set equal to 0. Therefore, it's not in the correct form right now. So what I'm going to do is I'll move this negative 3x to this side so that I'll have 0 on this side, so I can set my equation equal to 0. So I'll always do the opposite. I'll add 3x to both sides. And notice that x squared and 2 and 3x, they're all different terms, so I can't add any of these together since they're unlike terms. So what I'll do is I'll just write them down in order, so in standard form. So starting with my highest exponent, x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals negative 3x plus 3x is 0, and that's what we wanted. We need our equation set equal to 0 before we can do anything. Now remember your form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So that means the coefficient of my x squared term, that's my a, the coefficient of your x term is my b, and the coefficient of your, the constant, that's your c. And then if we're going to solve, again, sure, you could try to factor, but in this lesson we want to use the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So all you need to do now is plug in your numbers. So I have x equals the opposite of b. Well, b is 3. The opposite of 3 is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So again, b is 3, so 3 squared, minus 4 times a. A is 1. There's that imaginary 1 in front, times c. C is 2, all divided by 2 times a. So 2 times, and again, a was 1. Then we just need to follow PEMDAS. So we have equals negative 3 plus or minus. I want to take care of everything under the radical first. So the square root of, and then according to PEMDAS, I need to square first. And you can think of the radical kind of like as a grouping symbol, kind of like parentheses. That's why we take care of this first. And then while you're under the radical, you also follow PEMDAS. And PEMDAS says exponents first, 3 squared is 9, minus, and then you can multiply. 4 times 1 times 2. 4 times 2 is 8, times 1, that's still 8. So 9 minus 8 divided by, and 2 times 1 is just 2. Equals negative 3 plus or minus. Now you take the square root of 9 minus 8. So it's the square root of 9 minus 8 is 1. The square root of 1 divided by 2. Then we have, let's see, I'll come back, well, we'll just scroll down a little bit more, equals negative 3 plus or minus, the square root of 1 is just 1, divided by 2. Okay, at this point, you're going to end up with 2 answers because a lot of times you have 2 x-intercepts. Remember, you can have 2, 1, or you can even have no x-intercepts. But in this case, it looks like we're going to end up with 2 because we're going to have 2 different answers. We need to do negative 3 plus 1 divided by 2 and negative 3 minus 1 divided by 2. So once I get down to this point where I just have these 3 numbers, I'm going to split it up. So I have negative 3 plus 1 divided by 2. So I'm using the plus. Then I have to use the minus. Also, negative 3 minus 1 divided by 2. So again, all I did was split these up because we need to know what negative 3 plus 1 divided by 2 is and what negative 3 minus 1 divided by 2 is, since we have those 2 different x-intercepts. So negative 3 plus 1, that's negative 2 divided by 2, which is negative 1. And let's do the x here. And then we have x equals negative 3 minus 1 divided by 2. Remember, subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. So I have negative 3 plus a negative 1. That's negative 4 divided by 2. Negative 4 divided by 2, which is negative 2. So our 2 answers, x is negative 1 or negative 2. Now I know that those were a lot of steps, but really they all followed logically. Your first step was to write your formula. Then we substituted numbers. Then you need to follow PEMDAS. And then once you got down to the 3 numbers, then you split it up into your 2 different equations and solve. So let's try another one since this is a new concept. Again, we're doing the same thing that we've been doing. We're trying to find the solution to our quadratic function, which means finding our x-intercepts. Last time, we found our x-intercepts by factoring. This time we're learning how to find our x-intercepts using our quadratic formula. So remember, our answers were negative 2, negative 1. Let's see if we could have done it by factoring. X squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. So if we had factored, since there's no coefficient besides 1 to your x squared, you could have used the 2 column factors of your last term, which is 2, that add to be the middle term, sum of 3. So we have 2 and 1. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. So then you just split it up. X plus 2 times x plus 1 equals 0. And then you have to solve. And that's where we split it up. X plus 2 equals 0, or x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract 2 minus 2. X equals negative 2. Or minus 1 minus 1. X equals negative 1. And that's the exact same thing that we got down here. Negative 1, negative 2. Now I know that this seems like a whole lot more work to do than factoring, and it is. And that's why we usually don't use the quadratic formula unless your equation is not easily factorable. Since this one was, I probably would have just factored instead of doing the whole quadratic equation. But when it's a polynomial that's not easily factored, the quadratic formula is a good way to go. All right, so let's look at A and B, and in fact, I think probably need to just go ahead and move this B down. Try that again. So we have some more room. Okay, so our first step is always just to write our formula. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, all divided by 2A. And I know that seems like a hard formula to remember, but the more you write it, the more you use it, the easier it'll be to remember. And then we just need to substitute our numbers. So remember, A is in front of your x squared term, B is always your coefficient of your x term, and C is always your constant. So I have x equals the opposite of B. B is negative 2, so positive 2, plus or minus the square root of B squared. B is negative 2. Remember, every time you substitute, it goes in parentheses. Negative 2 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is negative 8. All divided by 2 times A, which is, again, 1. And then we just follow PEMDAS. So take care of everything under the radical first. So 2 plus or minus the square root, negative 2 squared, negative 2 times negative 2, positive 4. And then you have negative 4 times 1 times negative 8. So negative 4 times negative 8, positive 32 times 1, 32. So plus 32, all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So then we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 32 is 36, divided by 2. 2 plus or minus the square root of 36. Square root of 36 is 6, so 2 plus or minus 6 divided by 2. Now remember, when you get down to these three numbers, that's when you have to split it up, because you know you have those two different answers. So we want the 2 plus 6 divided by 2 and the 2 minus 6 divided by 2. So again, once you get down to the three numbers, split it up. So I have x equals 2 plus 6 divided by 2, or x equals 2 minus 6 divided by 2. Again, we're just splitting up the plus and minus. 2 plus 6 is 8 divided by 2. That's 4. 4. 2 minus 6 is negative 4, so x equals negative 4 divided by 2, which is negative 2. So our answers are x equals negative 2 or 4. All right, let's look at one more. If I were you, I'd try to do this on my own first, and then maybe play the video to see the answers. So this is very similar to that first example that we did, in that it's not set equal to 0 yet. We have to take care of that first. It's not in the right format. So let's subtract 117 from both sides first. Notice that none of these are like terms, so just write them in standard form, write them in order. And then use your formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Remember that your a is in front of your x squared, b is in front of your x, and c is your constant. So it equals the opposite of b, which is positive 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 117, all divided by 2 times a, which is 1. Again, we take care under the radical first. Negative 4 squared, that's positive 16. Then we have negative 4 times negative 117, which is 468, so plus 468, all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 468, which is 484, divided by 2, which equals 4 plus or minus, the square root of 484 is 22, so 22 divided by 2. And then now that's where we can split it up, since we've got it down to our three numbers. So x is 4 plus 22 divided by 2, or x is 4 minus 22 divided by 2. So x is 4 plus 22, that's 26, divided by 2 is 13. Or x is 4 minus 22, which is negative 18, divided by 2, and that's negative 9. So our answer is negative 9, 13. Notice I tend to put them in numerical order from least to greatest, and that is a good practice to follow. So remember your steps. Write your formula, or really even before that, make sure that your equation is in the proper format, so it needs to be set equal to 0. If it isn't, take care of that using algebra. Then write your formula, plug in your numbers, follow PEMDAS, take care of your radical first. When you get down to your three numbers, that's when you can split them up to find your two answers. Okay, we'll continue in the next video with example